My name's John David Williamson. I'm in Charleston, South Carolina. I've been coming to CCHF conferences since a long time ago. 2009, I think, is my first conference. So I love this place. This is home for me. So not Cincinnati, but you guys are home for me. Yeah, so who are y'all? That's my first question. Tell me why you're here. Who are you? A board member? Are you what did you come to this talk for? Just real brief. I'm a board member, or I want to be a board member. I have no idea. This was the closest ballroom to walk to. So new executive director. Okay. Yeah. Do we have, how many kind of executive directors, like those kind of folks here? Okay. All right. So how do I keep my board from killing me? All right. Yep. All right. Oh, other people. I see this. Cool. Yeah. Okay.
Building a board.
All right. So kind of building a board. So a working board, but yeah. Okay. Yeah.
But I should be careful of.
All right. All right. Yeah. Good. Okay. Yeah. So
try to be the eyes for my CEO along.
So helping your CEO interact with the board and help find new board members. Good. Okay. I think they're recording this, so I'm going to repeat some of that. So, have some younger board members that are trying to understand what it means to be on a board and how you interact with other board members that might be older, different stages of life, and maybe been on boards longer. I'm trying to get new developing boards going. So, okay. Yeah. So on a small number of board and not super engaged. So, okay, great. I need to rephrase my talk. Old enough to be on a board. Okay, good. Anybody on a board that's not a health center board, like just on some other nonprofit? Yeah. Okay. Awesome. All right. Well, again, I'm John David. I'm in Charleston. I'm going to look at my notes every now and then, see where we're going. Same thing. I started out in sort of the nonprofit world in high school. Interestingly, I was really involved with the Red Cross. Was actually on their board as a student member of the board of the Red Cross. Was on some other boards, kind of in that role. Got way too into governance for some reason as like a 17-year-old. Like, oh, these bylaws are interesting. People don't say that. That's weird. And so I don't know that I feel the same way about bylaws now, but just, love nonprofit work and interested in kind of how that works. And so, since then I'm now on the CCHF board, another CCHF board member over here. So some of this will be reflections on what I think is an awesome board. The CCHF board is amazing. It's by far one of the healthiest, best, most fun boards I've ever been on in my life. So I'm not a health center CEO. I kind of aspire to be one, to be honest with you. That's kind of, that's the world I think about a lot, to sort of executive leadership in health centers. And so I do hope this will be helpful for the executives to think, how do you interact with your board? This is going to be very basic. I will say this is like 101, maybe 100 and some, this is very, very basic about the board. And so I say that because sometimes going back to the basics is good. Sometimes maybe this is, you never heard the basics before. So, but I also say that because if there's places you want to jump in or interject, ask questions, this is a workshop, not a lecture. These are my objectives to encourage you to be involved. So I hope this will encourage you to be involved on boards. It'll get you excited about maybe looking for, a place where you can jump in. Maybe, a health center, maybe a health ministry, maybe not, maybe something else that you're passionate about. So I hope this will push you to engage your mission personally, kind of your personal mission, but also your organization, that you'll engage the mission there. We'll talk a lot about that, and equip you to be a good board member or a good executive. Those are my goals. Those are also, the CCF mission statement, just so you know. So question again, you can kind of answer this, but just, I want you to be thinking, like, what's your why? That was going to be like the title of my talk, but somebody else stole it. This Simon Sinek guy, I don't know, what's your why? But no, what's your, what is your why for being here? Like, why'd you come to this talk? Why'd you come to CCHF? Why are you on a board, or why are you an executive director or whatever? Kind of, that's just be thinking about, okay, what am I getting out of this? Why am I here? This is my family. I would say this is kind of the personal connection. So when you think that guy's an idiot, at least he has a beautiful family. It's my wife and 4 kids. Jessica, my wife, is a nurse practitioner. My 2 oldest boys there, Josiah and Elijah, are here at the conference. So you've probably seen them running around and causing trouble. Hopefully not, but we live in Charleston, South Carolina, like I said. So, all right. So part 1, what is a board? Again, this is the basics. And I have lots of pictures in here. Yeah. So lots of pictures of just people on boards and board stuff. And I hope you understand why, because I love this picture. Hey, Roger, you're in this picture. Yeah, Roger's right there. Don't you want to be part of this group? I do. I love these guys. This is so much fun. This is in Ethne, actually. Esther's clinic. This is right outside Ethne. We had our board meeting there in the fall. So, all right. So what is a board? There's lots of different terms for a board, or for the members of a board. They're directors or trustees or governors, you may hear. Now, we are talking about nonprofit boards. Certainly there are for-profit boards. We're going to not go down that route. And so a lot of this is similar, but some of it's not necessarily. This word fiduciary, it's a cool word. Makes you sound like you really know what you're talking about when you start saying, well, my fiduciary duty here is, So I really do like this word, and so we'll talk more about it because I do think it really encapsulates who you are as a board member, who the board is. So we'll come back to that. And this idea of authority and responsibility. So those are the two words that I think are really important to fiduciary, like understand what your fiduciary duty is. But a board has both authority and responsibility. These are just kind of some of the terminology that are going to come up. So I think we're CCHF, right? I think this is a great, obvious analogy is just as a body, though one has many parts, but all its many parts form one body, so it is with Christ, right? So this is 1 Corinthians 12, when Paul's talking about the body of Christ and how we have different functions, different roles. We can't say that that one's more important than the other. So this is an obvious analogy for us, to what a board is. A board is one body. And again, we'll talk about this a lot, but there are many members and they all have valuable purposes on that board, but it is one body. All right, so this is, So legally, this is from the South Carolina laws, statutes of laws. Your state has something that establishes what a nonprofit is, what a nonprofit corporation is, and they're all pretty similar. You'll have maybe some things that other states don't have, but the idea here is that somewhere in law in your state is established what a nonprofit is. And they'll say something like this: all corporate powers must be exercised by or under the authority of, and the affairs of the corporation managed under the direction of its board. All right, here's something that's important for executive directors, but especially for board members. Boards are not advisors. Boards are owners. And so I say it's more important. I think executive directors understand this usually. I think it's important for boards to understand, I'm not here just to advise. I'm here as the owner, you're not actually the owners either, but as the directors of this organization. And so that carries huge responsibility. It's got huge authority as well, but huge responsibility. So by state law, boards are, they have authority to direct the organization. So the owner, who owns your organization? Who is the owner? It's not the board. I said that, but that's not true. Yeah, the public, right? And so these same statutes establish why nonprofits exist, establish that you exist for the benefit of the community, for the public. And so the public is the owner of your organization, and your board is a representation of those owners, right? So that's true of any board, right? Your board is supposed to represent the owners. In your case, your community, the public, owns your organization, all right? Okay, fiduciary, this great word. So there's a couple different legal terms or legal definitions of this. A person who holds a legal or ethical relationship of trust with one or more parties. Of course, this is not just a business law term. This is a legal term in general. A fiduciary is the highest standard of care in equity or law. And I love this. I think this is actually from like an Australian law. But this quote: the distinguishing and overriding duty of a fiduciary is the obligation of undivided loyalty. Okay, so the board, they're not advisors. They have authority over the direction of the organization, all right? But the duty here, this fiduciary responsibility, is tremendous. And so we're going to get into what that is specifically a little more. All right, so here are some of the duties that you have as a fiduciary. By the way, fiduciary is a noun or an adjective, right? So you can say my fiduciary responsibility, but you are a fiduciary, right? A fiduciary is someone who holds this responsibility. So you are a fiduciary as a board. You also have a fiduciary duty. So we'll kind of use those interchangeable. But as a fiduciary, these are some of your duties. Okay, so as a board, you have a duty of care. Duty of care is exercising due diligence, acting with reasonable skill, and that you're acting with the care of a, quote, ordinarily prudent person, right? So the duty of care is that you're acting like a normal human being whenever you make decisions for this organization or you make decisions for this person, whoever you're a fiduciary for. So you have a duty of care. You have a duty of loyalty. So you have a duty to put the interest of the organization ahead of your own interest or the interest of people in your sphere or people that you may influence. So again, it's not just you have authority, you have this duty to put the interest of the organization ahead of your own interest. Part of that is conflict of interest, right? So you have to have you need to have a conflict of interest statement, and you need to excuse yourself from conflicts of interest, right? That's part of the duty of loyalty that you have as a fiduciary. Confidentiality, the same. And so, the conversations on a board, so some of those, things that happen within a board, you have a duty to be, for confidentiality as a loyalty to the organization. And you have a duty of obedience, and that means that you're going to comply with the laws and governing documents, policies. So your duty as a fiduciary is to make sure that you and the organization comply with your policies and documents. So here's JD's rule number 1. These are really simple and stupid. keep it simple, stupid. Keep it stupid, simple. It's one of my old mentors used to say, keep it stupid, simple. Care deeply. This is, I think, rule number one for me. If you want to be on a board, I think rule number one is you got to just care a lot about the organization. Sounds simple, but some of you on boards and some of you executive directors go, okay, I understand why that's important. So for CEOs, I'd say or people who are looking to develop your board, I think this is criteria number one. Not are they an accountant? Not, what's their skill set? I think rule number one is, does this person care deeply about the mission of our organization, about who we are, about our why? Do they know our why? Do they know why we exist? I have been a part of organizations that didn't thrive, I will say, who had board members. This is a large organization that had board members of a health center that had never stepped foot in a health center. They'd been on the board for years and had never been to any of the health centers. They'd never seen the work. I feel confident they couldn't articulate, 50% of our mission statement. My opinion is you don't want those people on your board if they don't really know what you're about. And not even the what. It's not even necessarily they need to see the what. They understand your why, like who you are. So caring deeply, I think, is number one. Yeah, I think for CEOs too, if you have, maybe you have people, but I think this person could get it. All right, so I'm not saying they have to come in and say, love your mission statement. Let me articulate it to you. This is just something you need to cultivate, right? And so if you have a board maybe and your board doesn't care deeply, or you have you're looking for new board members that you like this person, you think they can get it, but they don't really know you. Well, I think your duty, your responsibility is to cast vision for them, to help them care. I mean, they have the capacity to care. Maybe your current board members can care more deeply, but caring deeply, I think, is just rule number one. So, all right, fiduciary. Questions about fiduciary or just this idea of, by the way, I'm not a lawyer, so just to be clear, there are many times like, talk to your lawyer, but question about this idea of fiduciary, what it means. It's the highest standard of responsibility in law. I mean, it's huge. And so by being a fiduciary, it's a huge responsibility. My opinion is that you can find the skill sets that you need to make things work. So if you need an accountant, you know what? If they're not on your board, you can hire an accountant. If you need legal, so we're starting a small nonprofit health center in Charleston right now. We have a fun little board. We have a founding board. We might talk about this a little bit. We have a founding board. So it's kind of the founders, the incorporators trying to get it going. So it's not what our board will look like once we get operating. But I have a lawyer that has helped me with some of this stuff, and he's not on the board. Like he loves our mission. I think he does, to the point of he's never charged me a dime for all my work. I asked him for that, but he's contributed to our work, but he's not gonna be on our board. But I have him as someone I talk to a lot. And so again, maybe there'll be a time where he is appropriate for the board, but I think my opinion, and many people can argue with this, is that, you find people who care deeply and you can equip them, or you can find the resources outside of your board to do the stuff. If there's zero financial literacy on your board, that eventually will become a problem, but I think that, boards will develop over time to have those skill sets as well. So, all right, how are boards structured? They're made up of members. That's obvious. How many members? It can vary widely. And so most states have a minimum requirement. It's usually 3. So, your state may not, but most states for a nonprofit board have a minimum requirement. They often don't have a maximum, so you may have 100 members on a board, probably not. If you're an FQHC, you have a little bit more specific requirements of the number of board members and who they are, so those requirements. So you may have additional requirements for your structure of your board, but most states it's pretty broad. You have officers, so you're going to have officers. Again, this may be mandated by your states. Most states will say you have to have a president and a treasurer. Most boards will also have a secretary and vice president or vice chair. Again, maybe not be mandated by the state. Ex officio member is just one of these terms that comes up a lot. What's an ex officio member? Ex officio member is someone who's on there by their office. So by office, officio. It does not mean a non-voting board member necessarily. And so your CEO may be both. Your CEO may be on your board as an ex officio member. They're there because they're the CEO. But they're also a non-voting board member. You may have other non-voting board members. We've had students who have non-voting board member responsibilities. So they're not ex officio. We've elected them to be on the board, but they're students. And so just because of that role, they weren't voting board members. So there's 2 terms that sometimes get interchanged, but they're not the same. You may have founding boards. I didn't put that there. So you may have a founding board or like an incorporating board. Like I said, that's kind of where we are with our nonprofit. That's just people trying to get it off the ground. That might be a different group. Often that's the people who can kind of get it funded and get it put together. those often, in most states, you need to have an incorporators listed whenever you do incorporate as an organization. So again, most of that time, those will transition to a more of a working board or operating board or governance board. None of those are actually technical terms. So we use those terms a lot, like a working board or an operating board. Those are kind of descriptive, but those aren't actually legal terms or technical terms. So another thing about that is, so in our kind of founding board right now, one of my board members is in the room right now, so I got to be careful. I know. So I'm, presumably they're going to be the executive director or CEO of this organization, and I'm on the board, right? Because we're a founding board. Ain't nobody getting paid right now. So I am on the board right now as we kind of get this off the ground. So I see some faces all right, so is that okay? I'm the executive, I'm the CEO of this organization, but I'm also on the board as a voting member on the board. Okay, so real problem. I see you're going cringe face. Yeah, so it is a problem. So it's not right now, I don't think, because we're a founding board and I'm not getting paid. There's no, all the decisions about the organization are being made at the table. We're not making any operational decisions at this point outside that table. There will become a day very soon where I should not be a voting member on that board. And that's once there's paychecks going out, once there's money flowing, once there's anything that puts me in a conflict of interest. So it's that conflict of interest that creates an issue there. And so this goes for your employees and staff as well, right? That can be a problem, right? So you can't have them on the board because of a conflict of interest. If we're making decisions about their jobs or the direction of the organization, not their jobs, we'll get to that too. But so this is one kind of little unique niche where founding boards, incorporating boards will often have people on that board that will also be employees. It is not against the law. The law allows this. It's just not best practice. So it's certainly not best practice, and probably does get to, does it violate that duty to care, right? So, all right, I had to disclose that to myself. The other thing that's best practice that I find a lot, so tell me about do you have term limits on your board members? Does anybody not have term limits on their board members? Oh gosh, that's a lot of hands. Okay. All right. You should change that. That's my opinion. So I think this is another, best practice absolutely is term limits. There's lots of reasons for that. This is another thing where we see where boards become really disengaged from mission is when we see term limits that people just stay on the board forever without this kind of refresh. Yeah, and it also, I think without term limits, the board becomes less concerned about creating structure and policy that will outlive them, right? Because they're like, well, we're controlling this thing. We got this. We're here, and we're not going anywhere. And so policy and sort of building things that last becomes less important. So this conversation this week, actually, the CCHF board, sorry, I talked really fast, so throw something at me. But the CCHF board this week, we were talking about one of our committees and just sort of the silly thing about naming it, but part of it was saying, okay, in 5 years from now, when none of us are sitting here, because we have 5-year term limits at the CCHF board, none of us are sitting here, is that going to make sense to someone else? Like what we have in our minds right now as the charter for this committee, what we want this committee to be, is someone not in this room right now going to understand what our heart was in this moment. Does that make sense? So it's important because of that term limit, we have to create things now that are going to make sense to the future board. So one of, I think, many reasons why term limits, they are best practice. That's not just my opinion. That is best practice. But why I think if you don't have them, you should really consider it. So how do you if you don't have term limits or you have things in your bylaws that need to change, how do you do that? So let's talk about that. So, and I'm going to answer that a little bit right now, and then maybe we'll come back up again later as well. So I think, I would say there may be a difference too in sort of a young, early, small board that's really, again, trying to get off the ground. Sometimes those term limits, I still think they're important, but, if they're 5 years, hopefully in 5 years, you're at a point, where you can bring some new people on. But again, I do think early on in an organization's life, sometimes those term limits are less critical because you're trying to get, again, those initial people who were so invested in it to get off the ground. But so committees is part of the answer to that. So I do think this is the value of committees. So we're going to talk some about committees, and I put this here as part of the structure. Again, boards don't necessarily have to have committees. I'm on boards with no committees, and that's okay. Most state laws do not require any committees. Some states do. I think California requires an audit committee, for example, for nonprofits. So you need to know your state law, but most states don't have requirements for specific committees. I will say most large developed boards will have at least a few committees that we'll talk about. But committees, I think the value of committees is that you get that kind of work done. And so the purpose of a committee is to kind of get all the work done. So the board meetings are about approving and moving things forward, and you can get the kind of dirty work done in committee in smaller groups. It also allows for things like term limits. So if you want to bring up this idea of term limits, it's not someone in the board meeting saying, I move that we change our bylaws to include term limits. And now they're looking at you and saying, oh yeah, defend that. Instead, you bring that up in committee. That's a committee discussion. They can look at, well, let's investigate. Can we do that? What does it take to do that? Then go through, what are best practices? Can we find other places that have done this? What should term limits see? And all that discussion can happen in a smaller group outside of a board meeting. And then if the committee gets to the point where they say, we want to recommend this, then the committee makes that recommendation at a board meeting. So that's one of the values, I think, of committee. Not only do you get more work done in committees, but you also have the power of that committee making suggestions, and it kind of, I don't say protects individuals, but it allows, I think, those individual voices to be more powerful in a sense. So please, that's a lot of work for 4 people. Yeah, so larger boards give you kind of more ability to influence change and have committees and things, but also those longer term limits. I mean, institutional memories is captured just in a small group of people, and yeah, it's a lot of momentum. You get one group of people that is going a certain way for a long time. There's just a lot of momentum that is difficult to change. I mean, I know an organization, the same one that I think had some other unhealthy things going on, their board chair has been the same board chair for 15 years. So who do you think? And they've had multiple CEOs in that time. So who do you think owns or thinks they run the organization, right? So committees will often have non-board members on it. Thank you. I forgot that. So you can have non-board members, people who may be experts. Maybe you bring that expert in, or maybe it's somebody who was on the board or has some other role. They can be staff members. You have a staff member maybe on a committee. So committees often can have, because committees cannot make decisions as a board, right? They are a subset of the board that can make recommendations to the board, but the board makes decisions. So you can have non-board members on committees. So, all right, thanks. Okay, board's role. Here's our job as a board. We do 3 things. This is what our jobs are. So we set strategy, we set oversight, and we set policy. And sort of the mechanisms, how do we do that? So our mechanisms to do that, so we really have 3 mechanisms. You have CEO accountability. So you can hold your CEO accountable, because how many employees does the board have? 1, right? The board employs 1 person, and that's the CEO, executive director, nobody else. The CEO only has 1 boss, and that's the board of directors. And so we can hold our CEO accountable. That's one mechanism of action to fulfill our job. We can set budgets. So we have the purse strings, right? We can set the budget and what the organization can and can't pay for. And then policy change. So we can set policy. So what is strategy? Strategy is set by the board. This is maybe a whole other conversation, but the board of directors should set sort of the strategy for the organization as a whole, like where we're headed. But then your operations team, your CEO and the CEO's team is going to set sort of how you get there. Okay, they're going to set the specific strategies for fulfilling that bigger strategy. So sometimes that term gets kind of used in multiple different ways, but organizational strategy, a strategic plan, that's a board level activity saying this is where we're going. And so I put the ship up here because of my rule number 2. And I think just sort of keeping this in mind, what does this look like? I think you're, as the board, your job is to set the course, not steer the ship. All right. So you say, here's where we're going. Here's who we are, where we're going. Here are the guidelines of what you need to stay in. Right? I don't want you to sail down there to get there. Here are the guidelines, but now, Captain, you're going to sail this ship. And then you step off and the captain sails the ship. All right. How do you define steering the ship? Well, so you have these 3 mechanisms. So what does this look like, right? So what is not up here? So what is not up here? What mechanisms do you not have that might be steering the ship? What's that? Mission. Okay, so mission. So we're going to talk about mission. Mission is this first thing, setting strategy. So mission, you're setting the destination. That is a board responsibility. Hiring and firing. So that's the classic one, right? So you have 0 authority and 0 responsibility to hire and fire anyone in this organization other than the CEO. And I'll tell you, if you're stepping into that and that's creeping in, then you're in dangerous waters. This is another tricky thing too, particularly in small organizations, and is that you say, I mean, your board members are super invested probably in your organization and what they're doing. And so they're probably talking like, I have an idea. I have this idea. What about this? Or I have this person, and board members can do that with great hearts. And that's not a bad thing. All right. But you have to be very careful as a board member and as a CEO to draw the line between, okay, is this you're saying this as the board, or are you saying this as a volunteer friend, suggestion? And I think that's a really important distinction that has to be made. And so I think particularly in small organizations, one way to do that is to have separate board meetings and operational meetings. So again, we're not doing this, but we have a board right now in our little nonprofit that is everything. There's no staff, but we have board meetings. We probably should have board meetings and then say, okay, board meeting maybe now, maybe at lunch today, we're going to have an operations meeting and make sure. So again, this comes up at CCHF sometimes because the CCHF board members are all super invested in this movement. And sometimes we get so excited about the things we want CCHF to be and do. We'll tell Steve and now Rick, like this, do this. And we have to step back and go, who's leading this conversation? If a conversation about the day-to-day operations of the organization is being led by a board member, that's a problem. If that conversation, though, is involving the board member, but it's being led by the CEO, then that's not a bad thing, right? So that's where sometimes we had this conversation again this week of, okay, let's maybe suggest to the CEO that they could have a committee. If he wanted to, he could have a committee to talk about this thing, and we're happy to be a part of that if he wants us to be a part of that. That's his thing. It's not a board committee, but just kind of a suggestion to them. So we had for a while, we had a conference committee. CCHF had a conference committee. And all that was this was years ago. There's so much going on here, and he had even less staff than they do now. And he just wanted to bounce ideas off stuff and want a lot of impact. There's a lot, And as a board, we realized this is seemingly helpful to Steve, but should not be a board committee. This is Steve's committee, and by calling it a board committee, that's a real problem. So in that case, we said, as the board, we formally disbanded the conference committee and said, hey, Steve, we're available anytime you want, and so if you want to do this, I don't know. I don't know if that's helpful to you, but I think that you have to really be careful. One question I do like to ask is this thing I'm doing, or as a board member, if I say this, if I post this on social media, if I make this suggestion, if I talk to this staff member, is that going to undermine the authority of the CEO? So if the answer is yes, then I need to not post it or not do it or not say it. But that's maybe not the only litmus test, but for me, that's one litmus test is this going to undermine the CEO's role and ability to lead the organization? That's a great question. I think we can talk all day about what does it look like to not steer the ship. I think that's a great question. I think just keeping that in mind of, am I steering the ship right now? Or am I letting the CEO do it? Responsibility for fundraising. So it's not specifically up there, but that is about the financial well-being of your organization. And so I think we'll talk a little bit about it, but certainly in the desire you're setting the budget, right? And so if you're saying this is our budget and we want to spend this amount of money, then recognize you got to also raise that amount of money through operations or donations or whatever. And so it is a part of your responsibility to oversee that. And so in your responsibility to oversee it, you may say, hey, we also need to help development. We do have like CCHF has a development committee. And the idea there is how can we further development there? So I do think that's a place where the board should feel the burden of responsibility to help fund care a lot about it and help fund what's going on there. And that's part, again, kind of raising the budget. But how those fundraising operations go about, sort of the message that's given out, again, is kind of getting into operations a little bit. So that's sort of a fine line there. All right, this is my one voice picture, right? So there's many minds, one voice, right? So a board speaks as one. There are not many voices from the board. There are many voices within the board, right? And all those voices are equal and valued and important. That's another kind of principle. Every single person in the board has the same level of authority within the board, right? There's not anyone more important. The chair has a little bit more ability to influence things because they're setting an agenda, et cetera, but every single board member has one vote, and each vote counts the same. But as a board, you have one voice together. So I hate hearing the board unanimously decided blank. So one, I shouldn't know as a non-board member what the vote was on that issue. What if and then it makes me start thinking, well, the other vote's not unanimous, So now I'll say, like CCHF, when we hired our new CEO, we said publicly, we unanimously as a board elect Rick Donald as our new CEO because we wanted to emphasize that it was overwhelmingly positive, right? So it was a point of emphasis. I was a little uncomfortable with it, frankly, because I just don't like that term. So, but there may be a time to say that for emphasis, but when you hear that, the board always speaks as one voice. It doesn't have to be unanimous how they vote. It doesn't matter. And I say as a board member, the boardroom should be a safe place for you to disagree. You need to disagree. You need to have arguments. You need to have discussion. And you need to be okay voting against something. And then when you're on the losing side of that vote, you need to be okay speaking as one voice and saying, I'm behind this. I support this, right? Because the board speaks. And that's, I think, part of just making the boardroom a safe space to have those conversations. We speak as one voice, but we want to have engaged debates in between that. So meetings, maybe I'll try to skip some of this. How do meetings run? Meetings have an agenda. Who uses Robert Rules of Order in their board meetings? Raise your hand if you use Robert Rules of Order. Really? Nobody uses Robert Rules of Order in their board meetings. That's the point. We talk about it. And so Robert's Rules of Order, this like 8 billion page thing. Most of us will use, the essentials of Robert's Rules of Order. So here's how I always know that none of us, we say we do, but don't really follow. It's like how do motions go in Robert's Rules of Order? someone makes a motion, someone seconds it, then you have discussion, right? And then you vote on that, all right? How does it happen at your board meeting? We talk about something, and then someone says, okay, I'm going to make a motion based on this discussion, and you make a motion, and then you make more discussion, but then you vote on it. So discussion comes after the formal. Anyway, that's an aside. The point is, Robert's Rules of Order are helpful. None of us follow them, and that's okay. It's okay not to say we follow Robert's Rules of Order exactly like they're supposed to. They're meant to help your board meetings move along, but there should be some structure in sort of how board meetings go. Again, this is 101, so I'm going to get into that, but actions of the board have to go to vote, right? And so when we say the board has done this thing, right, we're speaking as one voice. It's on actions that have come through a voting process, and that voting process should include someone making a motion for an action. I move that we do this, that we change our bylaws to have term limits. And then someone seconds that motion, and then we have discussion about that. Again, maybe you've already had some. And at some point, you vote on that, yes or no. And again, majority typically rules. So you may have some things like bylaw changes may require more than a majority, and that would be in your bylaws. But so anyway, that's the typical kind of way things go. Decisions should be made in the boardroom, not in the hallway. So certainly we talk about things outside the boardroom, but decisions should be made in the boardroom, not like the meeting before the meeting we talk about. Like, let me get everybody on my side before we go in this meeting because I know we're going to have this vote and I want them to be on my side. That shouldn't happen. Yeah, decisions happen in the boardroom, not the hallway. You can't abstain. You should abstain if you have a conflict of interest. You may have heard of a consent agenda. So my hospital boards, we do this a lot where it's like the agenda goes out, you get the documents and all ahead of time, and we're going to get through that stuff. And part of that is that we're going to have discussion and we're going to say, are there any objections to this moving forward? And if there's no objections, then by consent, we say that passes and we move forward. So that's one way. If you have an engaged board that's going to do their homework ahead of time, you can move through things pretty quickly with a consent agenda. Tabling a vote means we're going to have a discussion. Somebody made a motion, we're going to discuss it, but we're not going to vote on it because we're not ready to vote. We're going to table it to another time. Just terms you may hear. You get tired of discussion, you say, I'm going to call the vote. So you can make a motion to call the vote. Anyway, these are just kind of terms you may hear, but most boards are small enough and you get along pretty well and you have discussion and someone makes a motion and you vote on it. It's usually pretty simple. Is there a benefit to bringing motions ahead of time? You can't bring motions outside of an adjourned board meeting. And I'll with an asterisk to that real quick, but so you can't, the board acts as a board in adjourned session. I mean, in session, and that's all. And so, but this is where particularly your chair who sets the agenda, there may be times to say, hey, can we discuss this maybe, and they can decide to put on the agenda or not. Now, the agenda is also approved as part of your process. Usually, the first thing you do is you approve the agenda for the meeting, and so you may say, I make a motion that we add to this meeting's agenda a discussion about term limits. And so that's one place, again, the chair has a lot of influence. So you may tell the chair ahead of time, hey, you think we can put this on there? Maybe they could put it on the agenda or not. But if not, you should vote on the agenda and approve the agenda at the beginning of the meeting. And you may say, I want to add this to the agenda, and people can say yes or no. So you can send things out ahead of time and say, hey, I'd love for you to review this or look at this or think about this before the board meeting. Here's some material. Send that out ahead of time so people always kind of can prepare for the discussion. That's also a little nudge that maybe you're going to put on the agenda. Yeah, so good. So boards can act outside of board meetings if your bylaws allow it. So the executive committee typically is the only body or part of a board that can make decisions as the board under certain circumstances. So maybe you say part of the classic one is the board's going to approve an executive package for the CEO with sort of stipulations based on negotiations with the CEO. And so we're going to approve this package, and there's some wiggle room in there. And the executive committee has the final say in finalizing that final number. And so there are a few times where you can have actions or decisions outside the board, or emergency situations where you have something that comes up between board meetings. CCHF board meets 3 times a year. I can't think of anything recently, but you may have something that comes up suddenly. Steve was in the hospital one time, and it's like, we need to make some decisions right now. And this is years ago. And so the executive committee had to kind of step in and make some interim decisions. Those decisions, they were kind of emergency decisions, had to then be approved at the next board meeting. So we had to bring them up and say, this happened. We made this decision about this bank account or something. And so now we need to formally approve this at the next board meeting. So again, the board speaks as one voice. There's very few things that can happen outside of the board meeting. Like, who sets the agenda? The chair is responsible for setting the agenda. And so the executive director, hopefully your executive director and your chair have a great relationship and they're talking all the time. And so that should have a lot of influence. But this is the board, and the board is not, the executive director, shouldn't be. So usually the chair is setting that agenda. But again, that agenda is approved by the whole board at the beginning of the meeting. And so most boards will send that out ahead of time. Brianna is our current CCHF board chair, and she's stinking amazing. Every board chair after her because she's just on everything. She's awesome. But she'll always send the agenda out, a week ahead and say, here's the agenda, kind of the same thing. Like, it's not an official board action, but here's the agenda that I'm going to propose, at the beginning of the meeting. And sometimes we'll get feedback and she'll adjust that beforehand. So it's usually about like, when do we have our lunch break, something like that. But yeah, the board chair controls the agenda or initially proposes it. All right, executive session is one more thing that comes out. Like, what is that? What's the executive session? That's typically an executive session is when you excuse everyone but board members. And so you may have guests, you may have invited guests to board meetings. You may have, again, ex officio members that are non-voting, like your CEO. An executive session is going to be private, only board members, and anyone else is excused. This is typically when we do like our CEO evaluation or compensation discussions. This is easily abused. I've seen that happen a lot, where you just make the whole meeting executive session so that you can excuse everyone and have private notes. Again, even in state law, there's usually some parameters about what executive session should be and it shouldn't be, but so we don't get into that. But executive session shouldn't be abused. It should be about things that really, the only appropriate place to talk about this is without any visitors in this room. And so usually talking about the CEO. So we keep our executive session minutes separate. They're a whole separate kind of secretary to secretary file that goes along that doesn't go in our published minutes. Because again, who owns your organization? The public does. And so, by the way, all these meetings by law are open to the public. So, and again, every state's a little different. Your bylaws might be different about how that, but by law, nonprofit board meetings are open to the public. You're representing the public. You're not the owners, right? And so executive session will be that time where if you have a lot of people who have shown up, is one time where you can exclude, again, visitors or public. So, all right. So committees, again, we talked about a little bit. You don't have to have committees. Typically, most large organizations will have at least these three: executive, finance, and governance. I'm going to skip through some of this. Oh, and on and on and on. You can committee to death. Finance committee. So finance is a responsibility of the board, and therefore there often is a committee that oversees that because it's such a big thing. Here's my big point here. Like, here's the board's responsibility in finance. It's a lot. It can seem daunting. Like, we're responsible for all of this with the organization, like making sure that, we have a sound financial position, that there's no conflicts of interest. We have internal controls within the organization to make sure there's not, bad things happening financially. That's a lot. And that can be like, okay, no thank you for the finance committee, right? And I see that a lot where people just don't want to be on the finance committee. We're on the finance committee. Yes, me and Roger. So here's my little quick summary. Like, if you're like, I don't know how to do that. I love people jumping on the finance committee because you can learn a ton. And here's what I think you should do. Get on the finance committee and just ask how much money do we have? So usually on the balance sheet, we won't get into financials. I love financials, but how much money we have? And one way to say it, how long, talk about days of cash on hand. Your organization probably does this, but how many days could we survive if we had no more revenue today, right? So that's one way to look at the financial health of your organization. And so again, as a board member, you might not know anything about finance to say, how much money do we have? How long could we last if we didn't get more revenue? Simple question, And then, so budget process and variance, just kind of when we look at the budget, I don't understand half of it, but why is this number so far off from budget? And I want my CEO to explain that. Or why is our fundraising so much below budgets or our expectation? Some people hate budgets and think budgets are worthless, but I think that's one way you can jump in and look at least where we thought we were going to go as an organization and why are we kind of off. So, that's a way to jump on the finance committee, or even as a just board member, not on the committee, just ask questions. So ask some questions. Ask questions. Ask stupid questions. It's okay. Most people on the board are terrified of all this financial stuff, and so nobody wants to ask questions. So please ask. And give. I do think this is, I think if you're on a nonprofit board, again, one way that you show that you care a lot about it is that you give to it. If that's $1 a month, that's $1 a month. But that you give to them is one way that you show that you care. We really ask for the CCHF board to have 100% giving, that every board member will give something. We don't track that. We do talk about it as far as a percentage, just so that, frankly, because it's always 100%, our board members always give at CCHF. It's awesome. And so I say that not to pat us on the back, because we pat each other on the back in that. So we want that to be the case because that shows investment in the organization. So I would ask, if you don't have board members that aren't giving, I think it's okay to ask them to give. And say, we'd really like you to give as a show. And another thing, if you're going to donors, some donors will ask you, well, what's your board percentage giving rate? And they'll ask you what that rate is. If you have a big donor that's going to give a bunch of money, they're going to know if your board gives. If you tell them 100%, they're going to say, okay, that means a lot to them. So, all right, remember rule number 1, care a lot about the organization. And this is huge. Money is a fuel, not even the fuel. Money is a fuel. It's the fuel usually, but it's not the mission. and this is so easy to get off track, and it sounds stupid and simple, but money is a fuel. It is not the mission. So I think often with boards particularly, we get so caught up in financials and how's our financial health? How is this? How's that? We lose kind of track of the mission. So I'm going to hurry through because I'm way behind, of course, always. Governance committee, they handle all the policies and procedures. We won't talk about hierarchy of documents, but your state law trumps everything else, and all the way down to kind of your policies as far as what you have to follow, not operational policies, but your board level policies. So the governance kind of manages all that. Governance committee does a lot of work. So that's probably the most working committee on a board. All right, I'm going to just skip through some of that. Liability, people worry about, well, what about my liability? I'm going to skip this. You have lots of protections as a board member. You should have protections as a board member, both insurance-wise from your organization, but also just there's civil immunity in law. But I'm not a lawyer again, but don't be afraid to get on a board because of, threats of lawsuits. That should not deter you. All right, for me, the most important thing while I'm rushing a little bit. So this is one of my favorite books in the world. So Jim Collins, Good to Great. Lots of his business books are just gold. And so Jim Collins, he wrote Good to Great, this book about these organizations that went from being good organizations to being great organizations. They didn't stagnate and stay good, and they didn't go bad. They went good to great. And then he wrote a little supplement, said Good to Great in the social sector, I think is what he called it. It's a little insert. And I love this little thing because I'm in nonprofit world, not, IBM. And this is from that book. He said, for a social sector organization, performance must be assessed relative to mission, not financial return. This is a business guy, like a big business guy, And for him, your performance should be measured relative to your mission, first and foremost, not financial return. So I ask this question all the time, and I think you should ask it all the time to yourself and your organization is, are we measuring success in our organization based on financial metrics? Or are we measuring success based on mission metrics? So I think, again, this is a board talk. I think the board has got to go back to this over and over and over again. Your budget needs to be measured based on, is this advancing our mission? Is this budget going to advance our mission? Not, are we going to make budget, but every policy we have, is this policy going to help our mission go forward? But I think, again, mission trueness, mission effectiveness has to be your metric of success for your organization. And that's a very different thing from the business world. Very different thing, because they're one and the same in a for-profit business, but they're not for us. Yeah, it's another question to ask, if your CEO disappeared tomorrow, all right, what would happen to your organization? If your CEO just disappeared, they just checked out, went to Tahiti or whatever, what happens to the mission of your organization? Your mission should be owned, first and foremost, by your board. I told you about this board that's been the same for 15 years. I'm going to make it sound good. It's not. But they've had 3 or 4 CEOs in that time. So who owns the mission? The board owns the mission. You've got to be mission true. Yeah. So, is it not up here? Oh, there it is. Okay. So as far as your board responsibility, I think you need to know why you exist. Again, I think this is just, paramount to being a good board. You have to know why your organization exists. What is your why as an organization? You need to differentiate means from mission. So again, fuel versus mission. What's the means to get the mission done? We need to think about that as a board. All right, is this a means or is this a mission? Sometimes means, and say, all right, means needs to go to the CEO's responsibility. We need to focus on mission here. But and then we need to change, when we want to change or change course, we need to make those changes based on enforcing our core mission, not based on, okay, this is going to get us better profits. Or this is going to, so you need to consider both means and mission. You just have to differentiate and make sure we don't lose track of, again, means, usually meaning financial means, but making sure our programs, our whatever that we're, even policies, those means of getting there are separate considerations from the mission that we're actually trying to achieve. So yes, I don't say we're not responsible at all for means, but so this is my little, rule number 3 is hold your why high. The why of your organization, hold it high. Hold your why high. I really think there's nothing more important for being a good board member, for having a good board, than your mission and your why being first and foremost in every decision they make, everything they do. I just think it's critical. And again, if you have board members who don't know why you exist, then start casting vision for them. Start trying to bring them into your work, show it to them. If you're looking for new board members, maybe you think it's going to be a good fit, cast vision for them. Make sure they understand the why before they're on there making decisions for you. This is from Greer and Horst wrote this book, Mission Drift, which is great. If you're concerned about mission drift, even if you're not, it's actually really great. And this quote, when we begin to see our priority as a growing ministry instead of a faithful one, all right, they're talking about ministries of all sorts. But when we start to see our priority as a growing ministry, how big is our church growing? I talk all about churches actually in this book. Instead of how faithful is our ministry, then we begin to sow the seeds of mission drift. Not three little, whatever, they're not gospel, obviously, but care deeply, set the course, don't steer the ship, hold your why high. Other kind of take-homes, pray. Again, care about your organization, pray for it, give to it, ask questions, get on a board and ask questions. Ask questions of board members before they get on the board, but don't be afraid to participate. If you're a young board member, you have your vote is worth just as much as the old board member, okay? Your vote's just as valuable, and so ask questions, be engaged. Read ahead of time, prepare for meetings. I didn't say that, but come to meetings prepared. When someone sends you those documents ahead of time and says, hey, I want to talk about this, read it ahead of time. It'll make meetings they'll be so much more valuable. Be a walking brochure. You want your board members to be so excited about your why that they're telling it. And this goes for your donors as well. We didn't get into that, but you want your donors to know your why, not your what. Your donors should give to you because of who you are and why you're doing it, not just because they want to see a health center in their neighborhood. Support your CEO. You should be an advocate for them. You should love them. You should encourage them. You may have to rebuke them. You may have to fire them. But you should, hopefully that's not the case. You really, the board CEO relationship, we hope, will be really close. Pursue joy. Board should be fun. It is the most life-giving thing in the world to me. I say this a lot. So the CEO search process this year was grueling for this CCHF board. We met every other week on Zoom meetings, and in between those every other week meetings, we were having interviews and other stuff going on. And I'm a hospitalist is my day job, so I'm going 12-hour shifts 7 days in a row, and I'm coming home at 7, 8 o'clock at night, and I'm like, I got an 8:30 Zoom meeting with the board. And I'm an introvert, man. I'm done after 12 hours in the hospital. But I was stoked. It was so life-giving to me to go to these Zoom meetings. You know why? Susan Post is my friend now. You know Susan Post? Like Susan Post is like one of my heroes. But there's people on the board that I've idolized. And I'm like, these are now people that I get to sit with and have a relationship with. And they are awesome, awesome people. And it's a joy. So you should pursue joy. Your board members should be excited and joyful about being there. So I think that's true of your work and your job. I hope you're pursuing joy. But your board should pursue joy in their work. Know your why. You should have this lens that you put on all the time. That's your mission lens. I mean, I think grants are an incredibly, I don't want to say dangerous, but that is, see organizations go off, just that 1 degree off a mission, right? Because of this, we had this one requirement, we got to change this. We got to take the word diversity out of our language now because we can't. So do you do it or not? I'm not saying you should or shouldn't, but I'm saying these little things. Take that language out might not affect your mission at all, but I think every grant has got to be filtered through this. Does this advance our mission? Is this fuel for our mission, or has this become its own thing that we have to cater to? So I think grants are a huge thing. Same with donors. You have a big donor come in, they're going to give 10% of your budget. So this year, CCHF has now set donor guidelines. If there's a donation that comes in or a proposed donation above a certain amount, it has to be approved by the board because we want to make sure it's filtered through our mission first. Is this big donation going to affect our ability to carry out our mission, or their expectations with this donation, et cetera. So I think, your fuel can be combustive. I don't know. That's a terrible analogy, but do you expect community board members to give when you're serving an underserved population? And FQHCs, maybe not FQHCs, even non-FQHCs, you need to have users of your services on your board. So they may not have resources. I think it's still, my personal opinion is that so I have, we lived overseas for a while. I have a lot of friends overseas, and one of my best friends who lives overseas lives on support, 100% support. And I was telling him about how I'm a terrible fundraiser. I just have a hard time asking people for money. He's like, man, I love it. He said, I come home and I get to say, this is what God's doing in my part of the world. Come on this journey with me. I want you to be a part of this, and so I'm trying to shift my mindset, but I think you're offering them an opportunity to be a part of that in a way that's, this is meaningful to me. I'll give $1. I'll give, so I think it's good to ask I think giving is when I give, it returns more to me, right? I mean, than it does take away from me. So I think that it gives that board member value. So I think it's okay to ask. I do think, obviously recognizing there's challenges there. If they're a homeless person that literally don't have $1, they might be a great board member. You might want on the board. And so maybe, hey, how can you still be invested in this board other ways, right? Maybe they show up to volunteer, those things. So yeah, good question. I'm not an expert in any of this stuff. So feel free to, catch up with someone later and say, hey, what he said was dumb. I have a better idea. Okay. So connect with each other. So when someone rotates off the board with a particular skill set, we utilize them a lot on these committees so they can stay on a committee if they're willing to. So like Katie Post was a former board chair. She stayed on our CEO search committee after she left the board. So committees can be a lot, or, if they're still just invested, you can still give them a call and ask advice and, they just aren't necessarily a voting member. Yeah. How do you keep people engaged when they leave? So, all right, time's up. Let you guys go. I'm happy to stay around a few minutes. Thank you so much for your time.